All right, we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Sports to Suits Live. I am your host, Amanda Banks, and weekly I have the opportunity to highlight former athletes that are leveraging their backgrounds in sports and crushing it in business. And this week is no different. I'm super excited about today's guest. But before I introduce her, if you are tuning in, definitely drop us a comment. Let us know where you're listening in from, that we are live, that you can hear us. I'm always excited to see where people are tuning in from. We've got people all over the world that are now tuning into this show. So it's super exciting. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And also feel free to drop any questions as we continue to go through the conversation. But without further ado, this week, I have Haley Zapolski on. I'm super excited about this conversation because Haley and I, she's known as Zap, so she's Zap. But we had the opportunity to meet at a networking event, and since then, she is a dynamic rock star, and I'm super excited to share her story and kind of dive into some of those details. But Zap, first off, thank you so much for joining in today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, and why don't you share with the audience as I make sure everything is up and running a little bit about your background and about yourself?
Sure. Let's see, I'm originally from Iowa and somehow got involved in this sport of rowing, which is, there's not a ton
That's
of,
random in Iowa, right?
oh yeah, no, very random. We were actually the only rowing team, high school rowing team in the state of Iowa. And went to University of Michigan, did D1 rowing there for all 4 years, and then did a brief stint in New York, ate me up, spit me out, landed in Nashville, and I've been here 3 years since. And I'm now the manager of employer engagement at Nashville Software School, and then am very active in the startup space here in town, and then recently getting a little bit more active in local politics.
Well, you got your hands in everything. We're going to dive into that. But I really am fascinated with this whole rowing scenario. So, how did you get into rowing? Like, and
Yeah,
what about it like fascinated you?
I love this story. So, no joke, it was a YMCA program. It was a YMCA Learn to Row I did with my mother as like a summer bonding experience. So, it was like for 2 weeks every day or something like that. And
And how old were you doing this?
I was like 14. I was
Oh my
14 and
goodness.
I didn't really like it. But my mom kind of liked it, and because my mom was a D1 swimmer, she always liked sports, trying new things. So she kind of kept at it. Because she would go to practice, I would keep going to practice. But it was like we were on like it was like a novice team, so it was literally just me and two other people would show up and row our boats around in tiny little circles, and we were bad at it until one day, like the actual team, we did like a test on the rowing machine. They're called ergs. We did a test on the erg, and I did the test, and I did really well, I guess. And then the rowing coach was like, "Oh, she's actually good at this. Let's bring her up to like the actual team," because our team wasn't like a team; it was just an activity. You went and rowed your boat. And then I joined the team, and it took me a while to be into it because I loved running, I love swimming, I love triathlons, but um, sort of when I like hit, I mean, I feel like as a woman, our bodies change in sports when we hit puberty. So I was slowing down running because I kept growing taller and taller, which cross country isn't always compatible. And then I got more into rowing as my body type became more fit for the sport. And yeah, but it's one of two YMCA rowing programs in the country. I think still it was the case when we did the program. Two YMCA rowing teams in the country, and only team in Iowa rowed on the Mississippi River. So it really was very random.
So how did you like go from high school into college? Because you're going into D1 sports, right? So I would imagine that there wasn't a whole lot of recruiting going on with your school in Iowa, specifically around
Yeah.
rowing.
Oh, this is fun. So I was still new to the sport. I'd only been rowing for a year, and we went to the national championships. It was actually in Tennessee. And I had been recruited. I had posted erg scores fast enough to go to the junior national team development camp. And
And how long had
we
you been rowing at that point? Like,
a year. I was
not long at
totally
all.
new. And no joke, so this camp was going to be in Connecticut. And it was just like a camp where you go and you row all the time, and it's to train you. It's to help you hopefully make the national team in future years. Well, anyways, I finished my races. My parents dropped me off with the coach of that camp. And me and two other girls get in the backseat of his truck and we drive 17 hours to camp. And this man barely stopped. And I was supposed to be at camp for 2 weeks. Well, I ended up doing very well at that little junior camp where they decided to pull me up, and I ended up staying for 2.5 months. And I went and I raced in Mexico at a race called Canamex, representing like the U.S. But I went into camp
And
like,
you had like very little
no,
experience.
I was very,
And were you away from your parents at that time, or did your
yes.
parents?
No, I was away from them the entire time, and they thought I was going to be away for 2 weeks. And then the next year, I went back again, and I actually, I was on the junior national team. I was there for another, I think, yeah, 2.5 months. This time, I went to Junior Worlds, which was in Lithuania. So I made the Worlds team the second year, and then I graduated high school early, actually. So I wrapped up my senior year early and moved out to Connecticut in January, and then was on the Junior Worlds team again, but this time went to Germany. So I was recruited, but it was only because like my parents took a risk and sent me with a stranger to this first camp. And even when I went to camp, I was like, I'm gonna crush it. I want to be the best person here.
So were you just like super physically gifted in the sport at first?
I think that I was very in shape from running and swimming. My body type was a really good fit, but I think it was for sure talent in some ways of like my natural body type. But what I loved about rowing is it's a sport where what you put in is what you get out in like such a grueling way. And I had just been used to putting in the work in other sports. And I think it was the other sports, like, how do I explain this? Like swimming and running were still endurance sports, but rowing is even more endurance because you can row a lot longer than you can run or swim because of its less impact on your body in some ways. So our rowing practices we'd be out there rowing for like 90 minutes straight, and like running for 90 minutes straight is really hard on your body. You can do it once a day, you can do that twice a day in rowing. So I think the endurance, I remember when I did go, what did we get tested for? It was like, this is a real camp. Like they test us for a VO2 max, and they had like prick our ear, and I had very good VO2 max or whatever it was. So they really kind of took an interest on me because they were like, oh, she's genetically disposed to like be good at this thing. I don't
Oh
know.
my goodness. So this is you and I have never talked about this. So to everybody listening, like I am learning as well. So we've got some folks popping in. We've got Jason tuning in from Tulsa. We've got Jane popping in from
Wow.
Ethiopia, which is super cool. We've got Michael in from
Hey,
Nashville. I
Michael.
think that we both know Michael. We've got Yesenia popping in, which is super exciting.
Hey,
We've already got a
Yesenia.
ton of questions. And I have so many questions about this whole kiddo scenario because it's not like, it's not very often that you hear like within a year getting all of these crazy opportunities and then going from no exposure of the sport at all to like diving head first into serious
It's
training.
very typical for rowing though, because
Is it?
rowing really, it is a sport where unfortunately a lot of folks don't have exposure. I will say also, my mom I think recognized like this is an opportunity. My mom quickly realized once we joined the team, hey, rowing is at a lot of top schools. It's a large women's program. A lot of schools really do invest in their women's rowing program because of probably Title IX legislation is like the honest reality, and it's a great gateway to opportunity. So I think my mom really pushed, like she didn't push me, but she was like, "This is good, keep at it." And yeah, it definitely was a game changer in my life, and I think it shifted everything up until where I am now because it just opened up a lot of doors. And rowing is, historically it's kind of seen as like an elitist sport, and I did not come from an elitist area, but it, I was around people who were going to boarding school, who were well traveled, well read, well educated, and I was absorbing all of this knowledge and culture from them, being like, oh, what? Like, I didn't know you could do these things. Like, this doesn't exist in my small town in Iowa, but over here on the East Coast, near these big cities, it does. So yeah, that was really the best part about it for me.
Was the exposure. So, for any parents that are tuning in, do you recommend them getting their kiddos exposed to rowing?
Yes, I think that if, well, I mean, yes and no. I think like any sports experience is, of course, like so valuable to learn just life lessons in a really like structured and safe environment. But I think rowing can particularly be excellent because there is a lot of scholarships available, primarily for women. So if you look at like college sports scholarships available, I don't know any of the numbers, but I know my mom looked at it and it was like, wow, there's a lot of women's rowing scholarships available. And so let's check this out. And rowing is one of the few sports that will also recruit people to join their college team who have no history of rowing. So at Michigan, we did recruit.
Really?
Yeah, they oftentimes don't get scholarship, but they will kind of get a leg up on getting into the school if they have experience in like swimming, running, um, triathlon, typically endurance sports. And if they're tall, then they'll sort of, I don't know how they do it, but they still sort of get lightly recruited from these rowing programs because there is a lot of untapped talent that just hasn't been exposed, but turns out to be really good at the sport.
So, what are some characteristics of individuals that would be like really talented in the sport? You mentioned height, you mentioned a background in endurance sports. Is there anything else that, like, because I've never been exposed to rowing or rowers. So, if I looked at my daughter and was like, oh, this may be something you would be really great at. I mean, she's tall. She's a great swimmer. She's going to be super tall. I'm like, maybe that would be a great sport for her. So, for people that are tuning in that may not have the background in rowing, like, what are some characteristics of individuals that would be good?
There's also two types of rowing. So I'm going to blow your mind. There's sculling and there's sweeping. So I
Okay.
grew up sculling, which is two oars, and you can row a boat alone. Sweeping is one oar, and typically you're in a larger boat and you have a coxswain, and that coxswain will yell commands. And they tend to have very different personalities. So sculling is a lot of folks who are very, I mean, it becomes then an individual sport. I would say it's very comparable to running. Like someone who just really can like lives off of that runner's high. Like I would just go and row by myself and sit in my own head for like 90 minutes twice a day, very meditative, and enjoy that. Uh, and I think that's who the sport sort of attracts. I think it's a little bit of a masochistic one for sure. But then sweeping is a lot more team oriented, and you have to really listen to directions and work with others a lot more. And to be honest, I was not good as good at sweeping, but I'm definitely more of an individual sports person, unfortunately. I hate
I
to
was a
admit it.
gymnast. It's okay. I get it.
Yeah, it's my reality. It's what I can work with others, but I'm better off on my own.
So let's talk about the recruiting process because we have a ton of people that tune in that are have kiddos that are going through this process right now, or we also have a lot of student athletes that are acclimating into their new life of being a student athlete. And so talk a little bit about that recruiting process for you. I know that things have totally changed now because of some of the NIL stuff, but what was that process going from high
Sure.
school into college, and what are some lessons learned that you could provide to the audience?
Well, another thing that parents should love about rowing is that it's definitely a quote unquote smart sport. So typically, when schools recruit rowers, they need to recruit students who are great athletes, but also great academically, because unfortunately, some other sports are not always as strong academically. And so, rowing is sort of they bring in like a balance. So, students who kind of lift the GPA perhaps of the athletic student body is it's literally, this is the truth though. So they like someone who's really well rounded, and I think for me, how did it work? I think people, it was really just because I was on the national team. Like rowing is very unique, I think, in how recruiting works. Is if you're good, you get invited to one of these development camps, and there's like 3 different tiers, and you kind of work your way up. And I was lucky enough to go from like tier, like the Mexico tier. I kind of jumped a tier straight to the national team tier, so I kind of skipped a step in there. But that's what gave me the visibility for coaches. And rowing is also a sport, I would say, similar to swimming or running. You have a time. It's your 2K erg test, and that's the first thing any coach probably wants to know: your 2K score and your ACT or SAT, depending on which one you take. Those are probably the 2 biggest numbers they want to know, and that really determines, I think, who talks to you, who looks at you, and then the other thing is I think they like someone well-rounded and strong academically because they expect that out of rowers culturally for whatever reason.
Interesting. So we've got Brian, we've got a bunch of people popping in with questions, but this one kind of goes in alignment with what we're talking about right now. And he said, rumor is that many volleyballers turned to rowing in school. Did you see that?
Yes, but I will say some of the volleyball players don't like it because it's so different. So they do sometimes pick like running and swimming and triathlons are a lot similar. Some volleyball players love it and crush it, and some of them don't because it's way too of course you have to have skill, but it's not skill in the same way. You're not playing a game, it's not a match, it's a race. So coming from a racing sport sometimes can be an easier transition, but yeah, there are a lot of good volleyball players for sure.
There are a ton of pole vaulters that used to be gymnasts. Like it's very similar in mine. Like
I
there's a
could see
lot of
that.
former gymnasts that turn into either divers or pole vaulters for whatever reason. Okay, so I don't think we have any other more. Well, we have tons of other questions. So let's dive into one of these from Jason. He said, "Who are some of the most influential people in your life?"
Sure. I mean, of course, this one's obvious. Like my mom. So my mom, she was a D1 swimmer. She was a swim coach my whole life. So typically didn't coach me directly, but would coach some other age group on the team. So I was sort of raised, I think, in a sports family from her. Of people always ask, did she push me? And truthfully, I'm like, I don't know if my mom pushed me, but my mom pushed herself, and so I had a
Well, and you watch that.
exactly. I watched that, and then we just did an Ironman together in the fall. So it was both our first Ironman. We did the same one, which was awesome. That high school junior national team coach, his name, no joke, is G-Man. The team he runs is GMS. It literally stands for G-Man Systems. Best coach ever, like incredible. And then, geez, this is a good question. I just feel like I have so many, like I'm very good at having a ton of loose mentors. I'm very bad at having like one. I have a lot of a pool of people to pick out of
Yep.
for my whole life. I think the final person I would say is my neighbor Isaiah. So if you follow me on like my personal socials, which I don't necessarily recommend, very different on there. I live next to a 15-year-old who I am super involved with. We were just rehearsing because he's performing at my birthday party this weekend, and so he's been over practicing his song, and he's writing a secret rap to perform about me. And he just gives me such, like, I don't know. I love the kid. He gives me great perspective in life, and I'm lucky enough that he lives next door to me.
That is awesome. Okay, so Yesenia popped in and she said, "Talk about the pace of crew and how it translate to what you do now."
Yeah, I think rowing gave me so much. I think the biggest thing rowing, it's a sport of mental toughness. So you constantly have to be proving yourself wrong. Like it was always like, what's the next barrier we can break? I think team sports is always like, how can we work together better, develop more skills? Rowing, this there is such an individual component when you're on the rowing machine, when you're racing in a single, oftentimes where it's like, I need to find something in myself that I didn't even know I was capable of. And
Mm.
so you're always in the zone of what you know you're capable of and what you don't quite know yet, but you have to kind of take that jump and see like, am I going to be able to pull it off? And I think ever since that's given me the willingness to fail. Like rowing is a sport where, yeah, sometimes lack of a better term, you shit the bed on a race or a workout. Like you
Yep.
went too hard, you were a little too ballsy in the first half, and you lose on the second, but you went out there and you pushed yourself harder than you could before. And I think now I'm used to pushing myself. I joke nothing will ever be as hard as D1 sports in school. Like my 4 years of college was the hardest part of my life. Like
So why? Let's dive into that because I
oh,
want people to
so
understand how challenging. I was not a college athlete, and I have a lot of friends that are former college athletes, as most people probably have seen because we're doing Sports to Suits Live. But I want people to understand how challenging college level and professional level sports are. So what made it so tough?
Sure. So yeah, I was recruited to the University of Michigan. It's really become like a top 5 rowing program. Obviously, I loved it because I thought it was the great sports and great school. So it was the best of both worlds and a very well funded program, which is great. We had a lot of resources available to on our academic sides and athletic sides, and I just don't think I realized, like, I was always such a serious athlete in high school, of course, but I didn't realize in college that being a serious athlete involves so much sacrifice. And so I always tell people, like, D1's, my dad is a D3 athletic director. And sometimes I do look back and wish that I did D3 athletics because I think I could have enjoyed the sport more and maybe been involved, had more college experiences. That being said, doing D1 sports at such a high level, I mean, it's just not a typical college experience. You're not a typical college student. You're not doing typical college things. You're waking up every morning at 5:30 to get to practice at 6 a.m. We practice on Saturdays and Sundays. Our day off was Monday, so there was no like
There was never a
Saturday
break.
night drinking, partying. Like that was far from our minds. And um, you learn such discipline, such time management, but it never became easy. I guess I would say. So I really like implore people to ask why they want to do that. I think I didn't. I just signed up because I thought I really, really wanted to compete. Looking back, I think I really enjoyed competing, but I don't know if I would choose again to compete on that level. Um, because when I went to college, I was like, oh my God, there's so many other things I could do. In Iowa, unfortunately, there's not like a ton I could do.
Oh my gosh, I mean, it's a totally like it's a huge transition.
Yeah, but it's funny now because I still like after I did not enjoy doing D1 sports in college. I'll say that I did not enjoy it. A lot of people do. I did not. What's funny is I graduated and I still continued to work out intensely. I did an Ironman triathlon. I had to train for 2 years because COVID canceled it the first time. So I trained for a year. It's canceled. I trained for another year. Finally did it. Um, but I think it's because it was on my own time, my own schedule. It's very regimented. So I think that was a big change. Is I was used to rowing a single where I could kind of pick what I did a little bit more. I always pushed myself, but I had a lot of freedom. And in D1 sports, you do not have freedom. You do as you are told, like your
Well,
whole
and
life.
you're on everybody else's time. Like you have a very specific schedule. All of the resources are provided to you. You have to commit to that
Some
for
people love
sure.
it. I think I'm unique. I think my teammates loved it because they loved the structure. They loved that everything was planned out for them. I hated that, but I learned my lesson. Like that's why I work with entrepreneurs. Like what a surprise.
Well, we've got Sheila Gibson popping in. She said she's so correct. I went back to university as an alumni and realized so many things, activities I did not know about. I mean, and everything is that of your team. Everything is provided you as far as resources, even the food. Like you have a very set structure on even your
Yeah.
diet and how you go about feeding your body. Like it's crazy to me.
I'll tell you, I was a nut. So I did get a scholarship, so I went to school for free, which I'm very grateful for. And I decided I'm going to milk this for all it's worth. So I think out of all 4 years, there's only one semester. I took 18 credits every single semester. So that was also my own doing. Like I love to overextend myself, but I was like, well, if it's free, I'm going to sign up for the maximum amount. Obviously, love learning.
Do you think if you would have tailored it back a little bit that the experience would have been a
Yeah.
little bit different?
I didn't know about balance then.
Yeah.
I mean, I still suck at it, but I'm a little bit better.
So let's talk about the transition out of sports, because you left school about 4 years ago, right? So
Mhm.
even though you're still doing all of these incredible sports and you're still training your body, it's very different because you're no longer in school. And so you're pretty new into the labor force, which has been quite a transition for you. So did you have any challenges going from college into the real world? Was that a big thing for you?
Oh, it was a huge thing. It was, I don't think anyone really prepares you for the loss of identity. I think I was a little bit luckier than some of my teammates because I think it was after my sophomore year, I sort of started losing the identity of sport then. So I had a longer, slower transition. I think when I was 18, 19, 20, I was like, this is it. This is all I know about. Like, sports is who I am. I live it, eat it, breathe it. And it was midway through college, I started being like, getting friendships outside of athletics and making relationships with professors. And I think that made my transition a little bit easier, is that I knew that there was something after sport, luckily. But no matter what, that identity crisis was so I graduated 3 days later. I moved to New York, so I was like the shining example of like success in some ways, because I had been I'd already sort of been working part-time remotely for this company. They flew me out for an interview in New York. My coaches didn't were pissed about that. They did not want me to miss practice for 2 days. um, I had a job offer, months before graduating. I graduated, I moved. Manhattan, a big job at a startup, what I wanted to do. And I got fired 3 months in, which is like, that's like a whole nother story of I didn't know probably what I wanted to do and picked the wrong thing. But my mental health was just suffering so much because I was so grounded by sport. Like when you,
Well, it was anything and everything that you knew at the time,
yeah,
and it was like your safe place, right? You had control over that scenario, and you knew it. Even though it was unpredictable, it was still predictable. You had a lot of control over your own success,
yeah,
especially in rowing, right? And not a team rowing environment, but the type of rowing you did, like you had a lot of control over that. So you go into the labor force, and it's a totally different scenario.
and that's so overwhelming. I think that's what's so attractive about sports, and that's still what I enjoy about it, is that the path to success is very clear. Like if I do X, Y, and Z consistently every day, I will achieve these results.
Yep.
Boom. And I think when you go into the workforce, you realize like there is no set like formula. And people like
No.
overcomplicate sports. And I liked rowing because it was like you put in the work, you see the results, and you put it in for years on end, like you will
It's the
achieve.
discipline, it's the consistency, it's
Yeah.
the
And
structure.
in the workforce, it's like I felt like I would be working, but I was like spinning my wheels a lot. Like I didn't know what I was ultimately even working toward. I was like, what's the end goal here? Like how do I know that I win? And now I know that I need to work in and I pick roles, and one of my needs for my roles is that I need to have wins all the time. I need to be winning regularly. I need my wins to be visible to people, because I think when I was in a role where you don't feel winning, no one's like, like giving you the affirmation that you're doing well and winning. I just wasn't used to being in an environment like that. But also like I didn't know how to eat normal. I lived in Manhattan, so there wasn't anywhere to like be outside beside the park, which was like far away. People think Central Park is like close. No, it's like a 30-minute train ride. So I I was used to working out outdoors every day, and so all of a sudden I'm like working out 3 times a week in a gym, and that's abnormal to me. And yeah, and it's just like who am I, and like where am I going? uh and it's so interesting. I had a girl move in with me last year. She was my roommate for 6 months, who I rowed with in high school on the national team. She had rowed 4 years at a top school, gone to the Olympic Training Center, spent 2 years there, ended up kind of leaving, didn't want to continue to pursue the Olympics. COVID kind of made it like difficult and
Yep.
even worse. And it was interesting having her move in and watching it, being reminded of myself a couple years earlier of that identity of like, who am I? What is this all about? Like, there's no coach. Unfortunately, like, there's no, a lot of managers are not good coaches. And I think athletes are so motivated by coaches. And so I seek coaches out now.
Yep.
And I
Me
probably
too.
will for the rest of my life. And I seek out wins.
I mean, we all do, right? And that's so. Why do you think you failed in that organization? Was it the struggling with the mental health stuff? Is it this, like, what about it just didn't work? And do you recommend athletes, especially like D1 athletes or professional level athletes, like to take a little bit of a break to figure that piece out before they go into the labor force?
I think that I should have taken a break. So what happened is, yeah, I moved to New York, worked for 3 months, got fired. I just didn't pick the right thing. I didn't know. No one was telling me what I
Like,
should
did you
do.
struggle with that piece too?
What piece?
Like getting fired? Like that's a that,
Oh yeah, it was terrible. It was like
like
it was like the worst breakup of my life, I would say, because I think I think what I did wrong is actually I latched onto the job so much because I really went from sport and put all my identity into this new job, but it
yep.
was kind of like going from like a good relationship and rebounding into like a toxic relationship almost. Seriously, because I was just needed to cling on to something.
Yep.
And I got new offers in New York, but I was like, I've screwed this up. I don't even, because I kept just getting job offers of what I was already doing, which is kind of like early stage growth startups or like early stage startup sales. And I ended up moving back in with my parents. It was so embarrassing. I'd like call them and be like, Mom, I messed up my life. Like, can I come back and live in the basement? And then I sat in their basement for 6 months. I worked part time, but it was 6 months of me being like, who am I? And like, what do I actually want to do now? And I needed that time to like evaluate. And I also, yeah, I never had a break for all 4 years of college. And before college, I competed in Germany for the national team, and I think it was 4 days later I moved into my freshman year dorm. And that was weird because I'd been living on my own for like 9 months, and so going into a dorm with rules I did not like either. So yeah, all of this is to say is I recommend taking a break, and I think um, I think athletes aren't asked to reflect very regularly, unfortunately. I think we're just expected to perform. Like, people don't ask you who you are and who you really want to be. And so that can sometimes be a really novel experience.
So we've got Sheila popping in here again too. She says your experience is also the reality that so many athletics experience due to lack of professional development and preparing for business world expectations, a role gap at athletic levels for sure. And then she said soft skills training gap for sure. That was something that I've even not be like from a school position going into the labor force just in general, I struggled with that because also there's this whole dynamic of like when you're in a high level sport, especially an individual sport, a lot of the responsibility is on you. And you, like you said, you constantly push yourself and like hard work and discipline and grit and motivation. That's just an instinctual skill of mine that, like,
Yeah.
I can be a beast in certain circumstances. And so trying to translate that into the labor force can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes because sometimes you're having to like tone it back a little bit, to manage the team dynamics to some degree. Like not everybody as is as intense, so to speak.
Yeah, my greatest flaw, and I have to say this in interviews, and I think sometimes I scare people away, is that, I'm not the best team player. On some teams, I'm a great team player, but those have to be high performing,
Yep.
vicious teams. Otherwise, I struggle. I want to push people too hard. I want to win too much. It's I make people uncomfortable. They don't enjoy working with me. So I think like my job at NSS is great because there's people I work with but me and I have my own function where I can just go out there and I can move at whatever pace I want to move at, which is great. And then I think I'm very collaborative in like working with other teams. But yeah, I joke all the time because another job that I struggled with too, and they kind of moved me, is that never put someone in the same role as me. So I had another job where it was me and then two other women, and we all kind of did the exact same thing because I will want to win way too much.
Like you were competing at all costs. Like it
Well,
was
the thing
like,
is, even when I'm against myself, I want to win. But it's against other people who might not be choosing. A lot of people don't like competition in that sense, and they don't. I enjoy it. I can be friends with people I compete with, but most people are not like that. And so, yeah, it's my greatest weakness is that, yeah, I'm not good on all teams. I'm very picky sometimes who I work with because I know that I'm the difficult one.
well, but you've got to have that level of intensity. If you have that level of intensity, then it can be a great collaborative. Like you can have an awesome team dynamic with that, but you've just got to find the right people that can match that intensity.
Exactly.
And don't get threatened, right? Like intensity in sport is very different than intensity in business, right? And I think that some athletes struggle with this too. Like you can't, the way that you approach people in conversation, like if you talk to people on a football field, like that level of intensity can almost be aggressive intensity, and you can't do that in business. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? Like
Yeah,
you can't yell
totally.
at people and expect really good results. But in sport, that's almost like common behavior, right?
Yeah, it's weird. I will say I do think some of the things accepted in sport should not be accepted, and I didn't realize that till I got
Yep.
into the workforce. I like the mental toughness it developed, but I think unfortunately high level sports I think has gone too far.
Yep.
And I think pushing people to the point that they break is sometimes like a goal for whatever reason, and like and in the workforce we know you can't achieve the best results if you're pushing people to the brink. They need to have balance, they need to have trust, they need to feel safe, like they need to feel safe enough to fail, but they can't feel like they're always failing. And so I think sports, like I think a lot of coaches push way too much. And so I always loved, like I talked about, G-Man was my favorite coach, and I feel like I should like write him a letter and like
So
thank
why
him.
is he your favorite coach? Like what about his
Oh my
coaching
god,
style do you
G-Man's
just
a
love?
nut. Okay, so G-Man, his name is Gunter Buter. I'm saying it wrong, but that's like literally his name. He's German. He's a man of very few words. And I remember he told my parents that he liked me because I was a very spunky athlete and I loved it. And he said that I was always going to succeed because I actually enjoyed it a lot more than the other athletes. Like I just, yeah, it just gave me so much joy. And I still get so much joy exercising. Like I was at the gym this morning. Everyone at the gym knows me. Like I love being there. But anyways, I think just G-Man was very good. He was the junior national team coach for the women. And it sounds weird because he's obviously an older man, but he really understood young women in this like unique way, and the balance of when to push, when to hold back. I think he was such like a father figure in many ways. Even though like I said, he's a man of few words, but when you got a good job from him, you were so stoked. He wasn't someone who raised his voice. I didn't ever do well with yelling myself. Like I just
Me
needed
neither.
someone who kind of looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're gonna do this," and I'm gonna be like, "Okay." um, but he understood the balance of pushing, but also having fun. Like I think sometimes high level sports forget that this is a game. Like this is something we have made up. It can feel like everything is on the line, but this is still like we've made up this competition for our own entertainment and pleasure. Like enjoy it. Like
And I was one of those kids that quit because of external environments and it was no longer fun. Like it became very, very miserable for me. I literally just posted about this yesterday about how, like, parents, we have got to do a much better job of supporting our kiddos. Sorry, I'm going to go on a tangent here for a minute,
yeah, go
but
for it.
support our kiddos in sport and realize sports are supposed to be fun. If you want longevity out of your kids and a successful sports career, the worst thing you can do is scream and yell at them in their sport while they're doing, not let the coaches talk. Like, I could literally go down this path forever, but you kind of triggered it when you said fun. Like, sports is supposed to be fun. Business
People
is also
forget.
supposed to be
It
fun.
makes
Like,
me weird when people forget that it's, especially when it is children. Because, yeah, my mom's a swim coach, and the best athletes are the ones who love it and
yes.
enjoy it and really just thrive in it. They're not the ones who are just putting their head down silently, like grueling through the work. Like, yeah, that's part of it, but there needs to be a joy and then a celebration. And I don't know. I think
Well, and
with
if you're associating, like, so I see this. My daughter plays travel soccer. She's just turned 12. Like, it is literally a U12 league, and parents are screaming and cussing on the sidelines. And I'm like, look, guys, like, you are causing kiddos to associate mistakes with complete and utter failure and taking that personally.
yeah,
And that becomes like toxicity at its core, and they'll quit. Like, that's the thing that kids will do, is they will quit. They will no longer find joy in sports. They will no longer see this as like this great learning opportunity or this place to be around friends. They'll end up quitting because they don't want to deal with the drama.
yeah. And I sometimes looking back, I thought about, so we would all kind of launch our boats off the dock. We would row. We'd have to do like this warm up row, which was like a mile and a half, and then we'd all meet. And G-Man took freaking forever to get to the point where we were meeting. But so we'd be sitting in our boats for like 10, 15 minutes. But in those 10, 15 minutes, it was like the most fun because there's no adult supervision. And we would be like, we would get in the water, we would get back in our boats, we'd like pull our boats together and chat. Like, we would just be having fun. And I always was like, oh, I wonder if he was just like late on purpose because it was our time just to be silly.
Like, be kids, be
Yeah,
little kids, and have fun.
exactly. Before we got in the workout.
So Kishore dropped a comment. Kishore is a friend of mine as well. He said, Zap, you were one of the best team players Nashville ever got. Good to have an ambassador like you. Keep up the great work. I
Oh, so
love that.
sweet. I don't
So
know
let's
if I'm
talk
one of
about
the
how
best
you
team
made it to
players.
Nashville. How did you make it to Nashville? So you go from New York back to your parents' basement. Now you're in Nashville and you're crushing it in business. So I want to dive a little bit into how you've kind of built community in Nashville. So how did you decide to come to Nashville?
Yeah, I came to Nashville on accident, but I'm staying on purpose. So,
Love that.
I kind of knew I knew New York was the wrong pick for me. I thought I wanted like a hyper competitive city, but I sort of realized another thing too is I realized is yeah, I do like to win. I need to go to a place that's a little bit smaller so I can achieve more. In New York, it's a rat race. Like, I'm always going to be the low man on the totem pole. And so I was looking at second cities. I ended up getting a job here at the Nashville Entrepreneur Center. I came for an interview and I just hung out, did the whole tourist Broadway thing for the weekend. Um, but I just felt like Nashville was a great size it's a great size pond where I could kind of stack up against other people, like, and have impact. I also really wanted to have impact. And then I came here and it's just been such a natural fit. Like, I'm so grateful for Nashville for giving me like this second chance. And I tell everyone, like, my favorite things about the city is that it's a very optimistic city, and
Yep.
I think it's one of the easiest place to meet people, make friends, build community. I've never been to a city where it's been so natural to meet people and genuine.
Everybody is so nice. Like, that's one of the most like if you're not from Nashville and you come into Nashville, it kind of throws you off a little bit, but people are genuinely nice. Like, they'll come up in conversation, they want to talk to you, they want to get to know you, and it's not just like it's not this fake encounter or anything. Like, people are legitimately like curious and interested and like want to help in
Yeah.
Nashville.
Oh, definitely, 100%.
So let's talk entrepreneurship. So why is entrepreneurship fascinating to you?
Sure. I think I've always how would I explain this? I think I've personally, you can ask my mom, I've always beat to the sound of my own drum. She always says that. It used to annoy me, but I've leaned into it now. And I was really into startups because I loved building something. I did love um, the idea of creating something from scratch and making it work. And I think ultimately, like, and it's a grind to do that. So I think sports kind of made sense because I was used to working. Rowing is, even though I kind of found some early stage success as like a teenager, it's a long haul to
Yep.
kind of get good. And it is doing a lot of work every single day. So already I was used to like, I like to challenge. Like I already
It's the
like
long game
challenge.
play.
Yeah,
Like
I
it's
like the
yeah.
long game. I also I like freedom. I like to do what I want. And I'm not even an entrepreneur. Like I like to work with founders. I would like to have my own company one day. Hopefully, I'm 26 now, and I think the best thing I can do is learn from people who have businesses and surround myself with them. But yeah, I'm trying to think of like, I don't know why this is the puzzle piece. I also think when you own a company, it does become part of your identity in a unique way. And so I was used to sports being so much a part of who I am. And so I think what I'm trying to do, at least now in the technology community, is not only what I do for work, but it's part of who I am. And I could have done anything. Like I think I could have done real estate, I could have done this or that. I think startups is just what I picked because they're freaking cool. But no matter what I picked, I was going to be all in because I was used to being
All
all
in.
in. And I also want to enjoy it and have fun with it and win. And like, I think I get to do all of those things, and I'm just doing them in a different way than I did growing up.
Well, and that you said something that was really critical. So you and I both share in this. Like I have a background in technology and I've learned a lot about
Mhm.
technology, but I'm not a technologist. Like I don't understand how to code. Like I understand a little bit now server talk, but like I don't understand how to create software platforms. But I was able to be really successful in sales just because of relationships and understand the technology landscape. And so I personally think that technology is a great place for former athletes, and you don't have to be in the code to actually be in technology roles.
Oh, definitely. I'm a big believer that all companies in the future will be technology companies, and that doesn't mean that we all have to become developers, but every company is looking at how technology can improve their
Yep.
business, can make things more efficient, can streamline things. And so we are all, no, every job interacts with technology in some shape or form nowadays, but there's just a lot of opportunity. And I think I also enjoy it because it's always about, technology is about what's next, and it's always changing, and so there's always something to like keep up with, um,
It's
which is really
exciting too.
fun.
I mean, some of the technology that's coming out is just fascinating. Like, and Nashville specifically has this very beautiful entrepreneurial thing going. Like, there's a huge emphasis on the startup ecosystem in Middle Tennessee, and it's continuing to grow. It's
Yeah,
amazing some of the stuff that's coming out of this city.
yeah, it's I think that's so. My personal mission is to build an inclusive and innovative tech and startup ecosystem in Nashville. I've had that mission for about like, I like wrote it down and like actually, okay, so here's another crazy thing about sports. I, one, was very into manifesting, and two, would love to like write down my goals and like put them on my mirror. As an
Yep.
adult, I still do that.
Yep.
It helps a lot. I recommend it to everyone. And I joke, I'm friends with people. And I joke that the one thing we have in common with a lot of people I'm close with is that we're crazy people who write our goals down and put them on
Yep.
our mirror. And I like founders because they're a lot of that like specific type of crazy where they're like, put their goals on their mirror.
You've got to be a little crazy to jump into entrepreneurship. Like there has to be a little bit of crazy there.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. But I'm on a mission to do that, and I don't know. It's a difficult mission. I didn't pick an easy one, but it's a wide one. Like there's so many things I can do within it. Like it's fun. It's a fun problem to tackle. I get to have fun conversations, and I like to be locally focused as well. Like there's a lot of people working on this task more broadly, and of course in Nashville too, but more broadly. And I think Nashville's great. I just love it here. This is where I think I can do something cool.
Well, you've done an awesome job about building community and developing relationships. And so we've got a couple of questions and we're getting close on time. So I want to make sure that we answer these questions. So Jason asks, we hear the word engagement used a lot in marketing and entrepreneurship. What does engagement mean to you and why is it important?
Sure, that's an interesting question. So I think engagement means to me sometimes it's almost like putting in the work. Like I feel like the reason people think I'm so engaged is genuinely because I really am having conversation after conversation after conversation. I've tried a million ways to like scale myself as a person and like make more introductions at scale, like do more at scale, but the best value I have to be engaged with people is to like show up as myself and like be present. But I think from like a marketing standpoint, where you are thinking about scalability, people want to engage with people who are authentic, and they love a good story that they can connect with, relate to, follow along, and I think that's how I've been able to find like an engaging audience, I guess.
Well, in Nashville, like that's another beautiful thing about Nashville is like you can show up as you are and people accept that. Like it doesn't matter what your background is, where you come from. It's not just local Nashville people. There are people coming in from literally all over the world now. And so there's so much diversity, there's so much culture, like there's so much stuff going on here where people can just be who they are and be accepted in the community.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. He's got a couple of other good questions. I want to pop them up here real quick. He said, what is one thing that you would tell a young entrepreneur that they must do early on in their career?
Fail,
Fail.
fail epically. Well, it doesn't have to be that big, but I think I they say this all the time, and I just don't feel like it really got into my brain until recently because I've had a lot of failures. And people, here's the thing: people don't always see my failures because I'm not gonna post about them on LinkedIn. Like, and it's not that I don't want to be vulnerable. It's that a lot of them would be inappropriate to share. I think like I'm not gonna share about money I lost or a relationship that went bad. Like that'd be inappropriate to share. It's not that I'm willing to talk about one on one, but um, my point is that failure is something you can practice, and people forget about that. And so putting yourselves into situations where you don't need to set yourself up for failure, but if it's a risk, you need to be taking risks that that's an option, and so you can open more doors for yourself.
So he's got one more. He said, if you could sum up your life in one word, what would that word be and why?
Oh my goodness, one word. This is like a heavy hitter question. Um, I would probably pick the word authenticity. So I have 5 values, and the first value is authenticity, and uh, I'm just really big on I don't know trying to be as true to myself as I possibly can be, and trying to bring that out in other people, and following the path that I think reflects my authentic self.
So how critical, and we've got a couple minutes, but you do a ton of mentorship, work around advocacy. Like how critical is mentorship to you? And
Yeah.
what does that
So
mean? Like, what does mentorship mean to you?
yeah, so I'm kind of at this weird age where I'm on both sides,
Yep.
which is so bizarre. And it's weird when people ask me to mentor because I'm like, you think I know something? Like, I guess maybe a thing or two, but I don't know if I'm an expert. But I feel like I've had so many. I mean, I just had a talk this morning about like getting financial advice from someone because I don't know. Like I'm still learning about money. Like I need to talk to people who have already done it. And so I love talking to people wiser than myself. I joke I don't know a thing. I know of people who know a lot more things than I do. Um, so mentorship is always asking about things you don't know for people who have already done it, but also there's a lot of things you don't even realize. And so I seriously, I was talking to a mentor this morning, and I'm not going to dig into it, but he brought up something about what I'm doing that I didn't even realize. So mentors are such an opportunity to like see yourself as a mirror, um, in a way that other people couldn't provide. because you can't always see yourself, but they are seeing you and experiencing you and can give you that advice. Um, and then I think mentoring other people is always great because it's a great way to give back, but it's great to have perspective. I think it's great to have perspective of you're like, oh, maybe I have come like far that I can give advice on this topic. Uh, and also, I like to prevent. I've made a lot of mistakes. I failed a lot, and I'd like to, although I tell people to go fail, I'd like to help you avoid it at all costs. So,
Well, and kind of like you said, so like rowing, like there's time, right? So you can kind of track your time, you know how to improve your time. But like in business, like yes, there are improvements, there are things that you can do on a daily basis to make moves forward, but there's not like a set time, right? There's goals that you can achieve towards. But sometimes there's different ways to get to those goals. And you've got to, like, I find mentors incredibly helpful because we've got people that are popping in. People love you, Zap. I just got to say that.
oh my goodness. Thanks,
But, you know,
everyone.
it's hard to stay on track sometimes. And mentors to me are almost like guides, right? Like they're
Yeah.
like, and they're also folks that, like, with people that are super highly disciplined, gritty, like, sometimes achieving, like taking the small successes and celebrating those, like we want to get to the end goal, and
Hmm.
it's hard for us to stop and celebrate the small successes that we're on. I think
I
that's how
definitely,
I am.
I like the guides. I definitely think sports is so appealing because it can be such a linear path,
Yep.
particularly racing sports, which I was in. It's a very linear path
Yep.
forward of what's next. And your career, you'll find so many moments where you see yourself with two paths or maybe more than that in front of you. And that's the moment where you need to call on a mentor and say, which path should I take? Because, and that's what's scary, but I, I think there's a lot of people you can find around you who are willing to help you answer those questions or ask you the right questions so you can figure it out.
So what's next for you? You've got your hands in so many things, and I'm gonna drop, like, if you are tuning in and you are not following Zap on LinkedIn, definitely reach out and connect with her. She has got so many amazing things that she's got going on. But what's next? So what are you working on now? What are ways that people can engage in the things that you're doing or follow the work that you've got going on?
That's I think right now I'm trying to stay put a little bit, at least for the summer. I don't like to make any big moves in the summer, but I mean, Nashville Software School, if anyone's ever hiring tech talent, talk to me. We're just moving and shaking always. But then my other thing is Nash Tech with building the startup ecosystem. I typically host events and workshops, which has been fun. But I just had another meeting this morning was about building a platform to just allow more deal flow in Nashville. And I'm really excited because I think that's been like a win I've been working for toward for a long time is I like to do one-off connections, but it's proven that it's not super sustainable. And so now being able to do it in more of a public way, I'm just really stoked about. It'll be, like I said, it's a passion project. No one's paying me to do it, but I'm excited to sort of reach this thing I've been working toward and putting the platform and the people and the companies and the investors together.
Well, I am super cheering you on. I can't thank you enough for joining in today and sharing all of your words of wisdom. I mean, you are doing so many amazing things for the community, and it's very exciting to watch your continued evolution of all of the things that you're working on and all the impacts that you're making. I know that there's so many people that just think the world of you. And there's actually somebody that reached out and said that they'd love to meet you. So I'll definitely connect the two of you
Happy.
ladies together. But I can't thank you enough for joining in and sharing your genius with everybody.
Oh my, that's a strong word, please. But thank you so much for having me, Amanda. And it's weird. I was thinking that I was just home with my family and they all want to talk about sports because like my extended relatives have no idea what I do for work. It is very confusing. So it's funny. It's been top of mind recently of like, oh my goodness, it's been 4 years. So it was so fun to talk about it and dig in. So I appreciate you being a great host.
Well, good. Well, and for everybody that tunes in, thank you so much for tuning in and continuing to support the show. if we can be of assistance in any way, please send us a direct message. And until next week, we'll see you again.
Thanks so much. Bye.